He is the producer and host of the Raptors Show on Sportsnet 590, The Fan. We welcome Amit Mann onto Hoopsology. Welcome.
Thanks, guys, for having me. Appreciate it very much. How we all doing? How are things? I understand you guys are south of me, which is awesome. I'm surprised you guys are reaching out to me. I was just expressing that beforehand, but hey, I mean, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, happy for you to come on. When just looking at all the teams in the NBA, I've always been compelled about the Raptors. I just think they're one of the coolest teams in the NBA, and just especially with just the growth of basketball within Canada and just everything that's happened with the Raptors recently in this era of the game. I think they are always relevant. So just want to kind of pick your brain on several topics. So let's
Sure.
start with just the All-Star break is now concluded, and the Raptors have won three in a row at this recording of this podcast. So we haven't talked too much Raptors. Just to admit that up front. So can you just give us a rundown in terms of how you felt the Raptors have fared through the All-Star break, and then what you're seeing in terms of their expectations of possibly making the play-in tournaments? That's a possibility within the Eastern Conference, or just looking for just more development of just the younger core of the Raptors and just them adjusting with missing just Fred VanVleet and then Pascal Siakam as well.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely want to make the play, and they've said that already. That is their goal. How legitimate it is, how likely it is. I mean, that's another conversation. They're currently 4 games out of the play-in picture with 2 teams to jump. But once Trey Young went down, unfortunately, for a month or so, it does seem like there's a bit of a window that maybe they can slip in there if they can get on a bit of a win streak. And they are on a 3-game win streak, the first one they've had all season, and they're pretty pumped about that. I'm sure everyone kind of saw the headlines about a pizza party. Just to make it
Mhm.
clear, the meat. I'm not sure who came up with it, but Darko didn't offer a pizza party. He offered to take them out to dinner. It was going to be like a
Yeah.
nice dinner. He wasn't going to get them pizza. I think someone on social kind of made a joke out of it, and it just kept on keeping on until they finally got a 3-game win streak going, and they've had a few 2-game win streaks, but they never got to 3, and so the joke just kept on persisting. And then here we are now, where they actually got it, and obviously I ran with it too. It was kind of funny, the pizza party thing. But anyways, they do have 3 in a row. They've been playing great. Like, honestly, I mean, it was Rick Carlisle after the game yesterday against the Pacers, is that he said, "Hey, I mean, these guys, like, they're legit." And that means something, right? This is a coach that's seen the Raptors already a couple times, and he also saw them, a few weeks ago. So he has an idea of what that team was then and what they are now. And I mean, I don't want to be too much of an optimist here, because the season has been a very odd season. Back-to-back odd seasons for the Toronto Raptors, it feels like. But this current team, it feels like they're gaining an identity. And we haven't been able to decisively say that, I think, for a few seasons. And even if there was an identity, it wasn't something that we want to buy into, because we didn't really believe it was going to work, right? Vision 69 is like definitely gone, and they doubled down on it a few times, and it just wasn't necessarily the way that they were going to be able to win games. But under this new coach, this new system, offensively, defensively, I think we're seeing a lot of buy-in. The players they brought in at the deadline over the course of this season through some trades with Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, they're just great fits for what Darko's system, what he wants the skill set to be of the players that he brings in. It's a perfect match, and I think we're seeing a lot of players enjoy being in the system currently.
So you mentioned Darko, and I saw the post game where they were talking about the pizza party. I think he said, "I'm going to take you guys out to something nicer than just pizza." Um,
Yes.
and I
Yes.
just want to the vibe in that locker room. I noticed, despite the record, it was very kind of easy going, and just like I realized they just won the game, but I don't know. I just got a sense that this is like a tight locker room. Am I far off on that, or do you just think they're just happy because they won? The vibe seemed different compared to other NBA locker rooms. Their camaraderie.
Yeah, I mean, a bit of column A, a bit of column B. I
Yeah.
think they are gaining some chemistry, and I think they wanted to get players on the same timeline. And you can just imagine if you have bunch of players who are 32, 30, 29, and then a bunch of guys who are like 21, 22, they can coexist and they can be cool, but will they have like a lot of chemistry? It's just like you're in different stages of your life, right? And so it can be difficult necessarily to gain that kind of chemistry, especially when it's compounded by losing. And they were losing a lot. And this is also a lot of very prideful players. We're going back to Pascal and OG and Fred. They're all great players, right, in their own right. But sometimes the puzzle pieces just don't necessarily fit. when you're trying to build a team. And I think that's what we were kind of seeing. They didn't have enough shooting. They didn't have enough skill versatility. They didn't have enough guard play. And so the seasons have gone the way they went. But, now I think everyone kind of sees a vision, right? They're seeing that if we have a bunch of players who can, run a pick and roll, who can pass the ball, who can shoot the ball, who can run in transition, who can cut off ball, who are willing screeners, you put that all together along with obviously some intensity on the defensive end, some energy, some feistiness, you might have something that could be pretty interesting, especially with, I think I think they have probably gained a bit more depth through these trades. They haven't had a backup center for, I don't know, 3 seasons. And unfortunately, Christian Koloko drafted him a few years ago. I believe he's had some heart issues or lung issues. And so his current career has kind of, it's a bit of at a standstill, unfortunately. And they had to drop him, but he was probably going to be the guy that was looked at as like the center of the future. But, he hasn't played at all this season. And I think he was put on waivers. So, but when that happens, like you think you have some depth at the center position, and you don't. It just goes away. But they've done a good job of retooling through some of these trades, and I honestly I think there is something kind of cool with what this team currently is, how good they can be. I mean, we're still figuring it out. Like I think a lot of teams are adjusting to their new play style, and while it is a play style, I think that is it's a style that has consistency. It has some life to it. Eventually, teams are going to game scheme around it, and it will be harder for them to score and to get kind of these possessions off as they are currently doing against, especially against the Pacers yesterday. But for the time being, I think it's interesting. I think fans are into it, and I think the players are buying into this instinctive cutting kind of style, read and react version of this offense.
How much of a pivot was this style, transitioning from, Coach Nick Nurse to Coach Darko now? I mean, how big of a shift has that been? I think the casual fan, or maybe just the fan who hasn't been watching the Raptors this year, I mean, kind of what folks hear, I think, with mainstream narratives is just everything with the Raptors right now is Scotty Barnes. It's all centered around him, which we know, of course, he was on the All-Star team. He's great. But what are you seeing with that system and how it differs from what they used to run under Coach Nurse?
It's a stark difference. It's a pretty stark difference. And now this isn't against Nick Nurse. I think he looked at the crop of players that he had, and he felt like this was a way in which they could get good offensive possessions, possession by possession, which I understood. I could see why he was feeling that way, but it was very stagnant. It didn't have a lot of off-ball movement. It was a lot of just like isolation, and then you create an edge, you create an advantage, you kick it out, swing, three, that kind of thing, penetrate, kick out, then you're able to get the defense in rotation. But with this style, it's, as I said, it's much more read and react. Like you are relying on players understanding what the defense is throwing at them, being willing to make that, quick penetration, kick it out, make that kick pass, and then you're hoping that the guy that you're passing to is going to, shot fake, slight rip through, high rip through, low rip through, and then they're either going to take a shot, they're going to move on. And it's just like this constant cycle of motion that they're hoping to get from all the players on the court. And yesterday, probably against the Pacers, it was the best version we've seen of that. Obviously, you're facing the Pacers. Not a great defensive team, right? You got to keep that in mind. However, I saw a desire to just get into the next action, and they weren't getting into isolation. There wasn't a lot of stagnant ball movement. It was moving with purpose. It was moving with force. They were decisive. And when you're doing that, especially in a system like this, and you have players that can get downhill, and that's really important, right? You need players that can actually touch the paint, and then being able to, force the defense to collapse, and you can kick it out. And then you need guys that can also read and react. And I think they're finding a nice blend of that currently. And players are kind of embracing it. And obviously the depth definitely helps. Them being able to go like legit, 8 players, 9 players deep definitely helps right now.
Yeah, sounds like kind of a tough type of scheme for a younger team to put into place. I mean, do you think it is maybe kind of withheld wins at the start of the season, kind of made it slow progress for them to learn that type of system?
Sure. And also, I mean, when it comes to a system, it is a system. And so you need players to buy into that system. That's why I mentioned buy-in earlier. I mean, Pascal, OG, even if they bought into the system, they may not have like the archetype to really thrive in something like that, which is about, quick acceleration, being able to make quick movements and being able to cut and create advantages through your cutting with speed and the force that I mentioned. And they're just not really geared that way. They're a bit more methodical with how they run. Similar to Scotty Barnes, but Scotty's accompanied by R.J. Barrett and Quickly and Gary Trent Jr. too. He's got a quick trigger, so you have a lot of players that can do things fast in whatever fashion that makes them successful. And when you pair that all together, you could have a system that looks kind of cool, looks at pops. And they brought in Bruce Brown; he's been pretty good too. A bit up and down sometimes, sure, but I like his ability to make like these intuitive reads on the fly. Obviously, his experience through the Nets and being a complimentary piece on a championship team like the Nuggets last season, it's definitely helped him. And he's been a pretty good addition, pretty consistent on that side of things. And then Kelly Olynyk, I mean, I can't say enough about him. He is a perfect fit for this system. I look at him and RJ Barrett, and I'm like, it's less like you found the matching glove. Those two guys.
I want to ask you about Grady Dick. I think you did an interview with him, correct, on Summer League, and I was just struck by his poise and just his maturity of being so young. Mm-hmm. And he's on a hot streak lately, shooting about 46% the last 16 games. Can you kind of explain where that swagger and confidence comes from, and where you kind of see the ceiling for him?
Oh, he was born with it. And he's mentioned that he's gotten some of that swagger through his parents. His parents have been a heavy influence on his progress in basketball, and I think it's his ability to just move on to the next shot, right? And he mentioned that to me in Summer League, and he's saying the same things, lately. Is that, hey, like I know I can make shots. I know I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to just keep on putting the work in, head down, and just keep on pushing forward. And that's all it is. Like it's sometimes, it is kind of that simple that you just don't relent from the process. You rely on the process because you trust your process. And eventually you just hope that it's going to get figured out. And he did go on a conditioning stint midway through the season. He played with the team early on for a little while. He was sent down to the 905. It didn't go very well. And then he went on like a 2-week conditioning stint. And he has said that he feels a little bit stronger in his core especially. And if you can imagine, like, not having enough core strength or just like that extra boost of being able to keep balance on defense when you're running around screens, you're not being pushed off as much, you're able to maintain your 2 feet. Things like this do help a person, shoot better. And it didn't really feel like it was ever a strength thing. It just felt like sometimes he was kind of aiming the ball or kind of like catapulting it. He does have kind of a high release, and he wasn't getting the arc that he really needed. But, lately, over the past, 2-3 weeks or so, I think since like probably mid-January, since he came back, it's been pretty steady, and he's making the shots that we thought he would make. And this is why the Raptors drafted him. They thought he would be an instant fit with the team that they had earlier on in the season, and that most of that team's gone now. But now with this version, like he's great. He's been awesome, and his potential is what could he be? I think something that's been thrown around is like, Pete Gordon Hayward, right? That kind of player. And that would be like really impressive because I think he's probably a better shooter than Gordon was. But, Hayward, man, like he was able to get downhill. He was able to cause havoc down there. He was able to push the pace, and he was a great dribbler. I don't know if Grady has all of those things, but that's something to shoot for. And I think that'd be a tremendous player.
So I also want to ask you, Amit, just kind of changing gears to officiating has been a very hot topic within the last couple of weeks. I saw Darko's rant as well, just about the officiating. And we've interviewed some previous guests, and they've seemed to be of different thoughts about this. Some people, they think that maybe there's overreaction to the officiating. Yet you see on mainstream media, there's a call for an overhaul in terms of removing just that officials report after the game has concluded. Where do you see the officiating now? Do you think it's a real problem, or do you think it's certain situations? Like you follow the Raptors, is this a situation where it's actually hurting the product on the floor, or do you think people are overreacting?
I don't know. It's a good question. It's a hard thing to balance. I think sometimes I feel like officials are a little bit too sensitive with some of the players at points, where you got to let them kind of voice their opinion. You got to let them have their say at points. Like there's a line to everything, but I think the line was a lot further away years ago. Officials would take it on the chin a little bit more. They would allow the player to say their piece and then they'd move on. But it doesn't seem like that's the case as much. And some of the technical fouls, like I think part of it is the officials are just enforcing the rules, and the rules have changed. Like there's some of the things that are in the fine print of the new NBA rule book. A lot of the officials, like, they're making the right call, but this is NBA decision, and they're trying to, what a player might say is, like, stifle emotion. They don't want guys beating on their chest. They don't want guys, slapping the glass when they have a huge dunk. And I think they got to find a way to allow players to do that. Like, there has to be room for emotion. Like, you can't control some of these things. Like in a playoff game, you have a huge dunk. It's game 4. You're about to take a 3-1 lead. You slap the backboard. You pump your chest. You push your teammate or something like that, and you're just having, like, you're feeling the emotion of the crowd and the intensity of the moment. And then you get a tech like, come on. It's like things like that kind of bother me a little bit. But other than that, I think the officiating has been fairly consistent, and probably we're more so talking about the NBA looking at how players are guarded, or I guess not guarded, really, because players have a lot of power these days, and defenses could certainly use a little bit of that back. You think about hand checking, whatever the rules are. Like, you just have to kind of look at ways in which you can allow defenses to have some say in how a possession goes down and how they guard and how they help on defense. Their center recovers, how they're able to make digs on drives, things like this. They do impact how much an offense is able to execute on that end of the court, and things like that could probably help. But other than the officials being a little bit too sensitive at points, I think it's okay. I think most of them are pretty cool. But then you just have your days, like, Ben Taylor, right? Fred VanVleet, he had his famous quotes last season.
Yeah.
That was ridiculous. Like, it was ridiculous in a way that I can't believe, like, how eloquently Fred just ripped this man. It was so funny.
Yeah, it was.
He was calm, cool, collected, but he ripped him to shreds, right? And then, this season with Darko, I remember that game too. That was a shame, as Darko said. It was a shame.
Yeah, I also wonder too, the other area, totally agree. I mean, great points there. The other area I still think is a problem for, maybe the casual viewer. I find it a little bit tedious too, is like the last 2 to 3 minutes of ball games where things are just constantly stopping. I think
that's a good one too.
Kind of another thing on my wish list. But I think you're right in the sensitivity, especially when we were seeing those incidences with Anthony Edwards and Giannis earlier in the season where they were getting
those are wild, man.
Those are
wild stuff.
Way too sensitive.
Yeah, that's a good point. The last 2 minutes of the game, that used to be an area where you'd let the teams kind of decide how things go. And it does feel like in that Raptor game against the Lakers, where Darko had those quotes, that was a case, I think, where it felt like you can say this was a foul or that was a foul, but you can call a foul on every single possession if you really want to. At some point, just let the players decide how things are going to go. If there's something egregious, a player gets slapped on the hand and it impedes him from making a shot, okay. But some of these ticky-tack things, especially when a team's in the bonus and it's going to impact the outcome of the game, like, yeah, I mean, it's a fine line. It's not a perfect system in that way, but I would like to see them make some small tweaks there as well. That's a good point.
So shifting gears to the rest of the Eastern Conference, pretty tight race at the moment. We've had
in some parts, yes.
In some parts, yeah. We've asked some other guests in terms of how it's going to shake out in terms of the power teams, and we've seen kind of the 76ers, with Joel Embiid, battle injuries. You mentioned Trae Young. Like, where do you see it kind of shaping out? I mean, even the Heat, they're struggling now, but the Heat are going to make some noise in the playoffs despite how the record's going to be. So where do you kind of
won 4 in a row? They're making noise.
They are.
They're doing pretty well, actually.
I guess what I mean is just their reputation in terms of just, they're kind of up and down. Yeah. So just where do you kind of see it kind of shaping? Do you see kind of the traditional power teams of the Celtics and the Bucks, or do you see kind of a new team emerging there, maybe the Cavaliers or somebody else?
Not the Cavaliers. I'm going to say that pretty firmly. I like their story. I would like to point out their record versus teams above 500 I don't have that right in front of me, but if you search it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. This was actually something that it's a parallel to some early DeMar DeRozan, Kyle Lowry teams that they just feasted on every single team that was below 500. But you saw their record above 500. It was like, 500, a little under 500. A lot of games where they lost in crunch time, and then those are seasons where, hey, they lost in the second round. But outside of that, I mean, I don't want to make it be a bit of a cop out here, but like the Knicks are really banged up. You just mentioned Joel Embiid. I think there are some reports that he could return in late March, but like, what condition is he going to be in? The Miami Heat, I think they're bringing in Terry Rozier. I think it's a great addition for. He's kind of exactly what they needed as well. They need some more punch in their scoring department, and Terry Rozier does that. He's a great isolation scorer, and just Eric Spoelstra is probably one of the best coaches in the NBA, if not the best coach in the NBA. Jimmy Butler, Bam, like there's something that's there, and also, I mean, they showed last season like that they can beat damn near anyone if they're healthy, and they got Eric Spoelstra behind them. So you never want to count them out. Outside of that, I mean, we're talking Bucks, Celtics. It does feel like this might be the year the Celtics get over the hump. At least like they're going to the finals, and assuming they're healthy, and then from there, I guess we'll see who they're facing. But Kristaps Porzingis has opened up so much for them, and the fact that they're able to bring in Drew Holiday, which in some ways kind of replaces Marcus Smart and what he was able to offer. In some ways, not everything, but you know what I mean. That seems like a team that's like, and they're gearing up to. They won 8 in a row. They're kind of realizing too that it's time to step it up, and they're doing that. So the Knicks, I would like to see them healthy. If they're healthy, I think they could be a really fun team to watch in the playoffs. The Bucks, they're there. I don't know, man. It feels like we talk about team chemistry. I'm not sure where that team is currently. We'll talk maybe in 2 weeks and we can have a better idea. But I don't really trust Doc Rivers in playoff situations. The resume is there, not in a good way. So I don't have any reason really to trust him in that way. And if it came down to a Bucks versus Heat series, which I think would again be really fun, especially considering like the whole Dame thing where he wanted to go to the Heat, and
True.
the Blazers wouldn't trade him there. They just said, nope, we're not going to do it. You're not going to go there. That's simple. You're just not. We're just not going to do it. We're just not going to answer the phone. When Pat really calls us, we're not going to answer. That's what they did. Anyway, those kinds of teams are the ones that are catching my interest. And in terms of Pacers, I got to see more because, again, defensively, I just mentioned like they're pretty porous at times. And if you want to be a team that goes deep in the playoffs, you got to be able to play at least a little bit of defense. And that's kind of it. Yeah, I guess from that top 6, I could see any team but the Cavaliers, if they're healthy, ending up in the conference final. But I still think the Celtics are the favorite.
Yeah, good analysis there. I have to ask your opinion, just as someone who watched Coach Nick Nurse. What are your thoughts on how he's done in Philadelphia so far in his tenure there?
Probably exactly what I thought he would do. Right, Nick Nurse is a great coach. He maybe doesn't have the ear of every single player because of how hard he coaches sometimes, and I'm sure he learned some things from his time in Toronto and how things ended. From what I understand, there were a lot of players that are like, it's okay if he goes. We're fine with that. And maybe it was a need for a change of scenery from both ends. As Nick mentioned, I believe he was in Philly at the time too, last season when he was asked about his coaching future, and he's like, I've been in Toronto for a long time. I think he was in Philly when he said that too. And now he's a coach in the 76ers. Anyways, I think he's done a bang up job, and I mentioned like the system he had in last season with the Raptors and how I think he did it just because of the players he had versus what he thought, what he could design and what he could aspire and what he could, come up with in his Nick Nurse, mad scientist brain. There's a lot more there. And I think he's showing that this season. And it seems like, yeah, he learned a little bit from how things ended with the Raptors. Like Tyrese Maxey has said glowing reviews about him. I'm sure other players have said great things about Nurse, and I think he's learning probably to what's that line between pushing too hard with some players, and then you just factor in like he can scheme up any kind of design to stop a star player. I was listening to JJ Redick and Luka Doncic a few weeks ago, and JJ had Luka on, and Luka was just talking about some of the defenses he's seen. He's like, I've seen everything. I've seen like I've seen box and one, And then JJ's like, who Bucks and won you? And he's like, Toronto. And then JJ's like, Nick Nurse. He's like, yeah. Right. Like he doesn't care. He'll find a way to at least, like, that's his MO. He wants to stop the star player. He wants to make the second and third option player become a star. Right. And usually, he's been right with that. And with the 76ers, if they're healthy, and Joel Embiid is Joel Embiid, which is, I'm not sure how likely it is that he's going to be that version of himself, considering everything. But if he is, like, they probably have the best player in every single series, arguably, right? And that means something. And then you factor in his ability on defense. I think their depth is a little bit better. Buddy Hield's a great addition for them. They could use that movement shooting, just the deception and decoys you can get from Buddy. He's like a knockdown shooter. He's ridiculous. It could be fun. It could be fun, but again, we got to see who's healthy when it comes to playoff time.
Yeah, just wanted to also ask just what you've seen over the last several years with, basketball culture in Canada and Toronto overall. Where is the fan base at? Does it feel like there's a pretty hardcore, well-established Raptors fan? Of course, we had We Are the North trending for a while there when they had that core, back in the 2010s. It's really grown. There have been shows like, No Dunks Now, but the Basketball Jones formerly one of their running bits was the Kenny Smith clip of "Give me some Raptor news." I'm sure you heard that, which really, credit to the Raptors. They, as Justin mentioned earlier in the episode, they've become a very, very credible, real NBA franchise, like legitimate. How are things looking? How is, the fan outlook and maybe the fan numbers out there?
Yeah, the past few seasons have taken a bit of a hit in that area because of how they've gone. But at the same time, there is a rabid fan base here. The way they support the team now, I don't think is indicative of what the fan base is, because it is it's from coast to coast, right? And it's truly like that. And any player that still comes by, and they had training camp in Victoria, BC, and I was fortunate enough to go there at the beginning of the season. And a lot of the new guys they can't believe we're so far. We're 5 hours away from Toronto, and here we have this huge fan base. It's a really cool thing for any player, right? To have you're the national team, right? Yeah. Truly, right? So it's a different experience for a lot of these guys. And in terms of basketball in the country, it just continues to grow. Look at how many players are from Canada that are in the NBA, right? And it's just going to keep on going up. And these are your signs of some of the roots that of Vince Carter, right? He's a bit of a polarizing figure in this country with how things ended, especially with, nowadays. I don't know if you guys saw, but a few days ago when he was asked which jersey he would rock going into the Hall of Fame, if he does make it, he said the Raptors. And so that spurred some conversations around here. And me personally, he is irreplaceable to me. Yes, things didn't end the way they probably should have, at least for someone with his stature in my mind. But players like Corey Joseph, Jamal Murray, Tristan Thompson, go down the line. Some of those guys from that generation of Canadian basketball players, they're going to say Andrew Wiggins. They're going to say that their favorite player was Vince Carter, and he's the reason why they picked up a basketball. And it's just continuing. And that evolution of basketball within the country, especially on the women's side, they've been great. They just qualified for the Olympics, and now the men did for the first time since I believe 1994. You got Shea rocking, he's repping Canada hard. I hope he becomes a Raptor somehow, some way, at some point in his career. Jamal Murray, come on over. Either you guys could use some star power here. Yeah, it's just growing. I'll put it that way. And it would be great if the Raptors are able to get themselves into contention at some point in the near future. I don't think it's going to be this season or the season after, but after that, who knows? We'll see. And we'll be able to see, that crazy fan base side that I love so much, especially during those We the North days.
Man, to your point, Team Canada beating Team USA.
It was like the C team of Team USA, but I hear what you're saying. Yes.
Still.
Yeah. A win's a win, right? A win is a win is a win. Kyle Lowry famously said, a win is a win is a win. Doesn't matter how you get it, just get the win. And they got it.
Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Can you please let our audience know where you can find you on social media and then any other projects you're working on as well?
Yeah, man. So just on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Amit_Man. And I'll be on the Raptors Show over the next few weeks, doing some co-hosting. So that's going to be coming up pretty soon. But that's kind of it. Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.